And we're back with the program. This is Gerald Glasser from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. We truly appreciate you being part of the broadcast here today. It's Thanksgiving time. It's a time to celebrate and thank the family as they gather around for a nice, beautiful turkey dinner and all the trimmings and all that good stuff. But for us pop culture fans, it's something so much more. Not only is it Black Friday shopping season, but it's that time again for wrestling fans. It is the annual Survivor Series from the WWE and the WWE Network. And who better to break down the Survivor Series card with me and all things pro wrestling than the man, the myth, the legend behind the wrestling podcast about nothing. Although don't tell the Kingpin that I said that because he might get mad at me and he's bigger than I am. But it is the man, the myth, the legend behind the wrestling podcast about nothing. It is Mike Crockett. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, Gerald. Thanks for having me back.
Always great to have you a part of the pop culture cosmos and the PCC multiverse. You guys have got an outstanding show covering the entire universe known as professional wrestling. And oh, what a crazy universe it is. First off, let's get everybody the insight on exactly what makes wrestling podcast about nothing so awesome.
Wow. Well, that's a big question there. Well, I think the thing that we offer is we both, Brian and myself, Brian Malonis, the Kingpin, have experience in professional wrestling. I've been a referee since the late 90s, and the Kingpin started wrestling in the early 2000s. So I have taken an extended hiatus, as I like to say, on the podcast, but the Kingpin is still out there each and every weekend doing independent shows,
Mike, you still there with me? You still there with me? Mike, you still there? Did I lose you? Still there? Did I lose you? You still there?
I'm here.
All right. It's like disappeared. It's like we had to maybe go on one of those conspiracy shows or missing shows, on the podcast, But it is the wrestling podcast about nothing. Mike, you and Brian do a tremendous job with your show. What channels and how best can they get a hold of you? Because I know as a team member of the Podcast Radio Network, your shows are on Tuesday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific. Is that correct?
Yeah, sometimes we skew a little earlier or skew a little later, but yeah, Tuesday nights on the Podcast Radio Network. And also, we do 2 podcasts a week on 2 different feeds. So you kind of have to look for us a little bit. Mondays, we're on the New Age Insiders Wrestling Network, good friends of or your wrestling podcast app. That's for wrestling podcast about nothing, of course. And all the feeds that we're on will come up and you can subscribe and listen on demand.
That's awesome indeed. Again, that's the wrestling podcast about nothing. Just search out the wrestling podcast about nothing on Facebook, Twitter, and also just right there for you. And plus also as well, again, Tuesday nights on the Podcast Radio Network. Mike, let's break down this card. It's going to be a pretty good card, I think, all things considered, especially now that AJ Styles has now taken the reins, and in the main event will go head-to-head against the Beast, Brock Lesnar. You and I have spoken in the past about Jinder Mahal and maybe what some term as an experiment with the WWE as far as making him a long-term champion for a while, but it looks like maybe another direction is going ahead with AJ Styles becoming the latest, the WWE SmackDown champion.
Yeah, sure seems that way. It seems very sudden. They stuck with Jinder Mahal for quite a long time, but yeah, just on an episode of SmackDown Live a couple weeks ago, AJ Styles beat Mahal for the championship, and you hear stuff like Vince didn't like the ratings, the trend in the ratings, so they decided to go a different direction, or maybe they just decided that the Jinder Mahal experiment is over. And it's a little weird because all we heard when this reign was going on with Jinder Mahal as WWE champion, we heard it's all because they're going to be going to India later in the year. And they haven't been to India yet. They're going to India in December. So some people are saying that maybe Jinder Mahal is going to get the title back before they go over to India. They're doing a show, and I guess something I just heard is that Triple H is challenging Jinder Mahal to a match at the show in India. So could the Jinder Mahal get the title back again in time for that tour? It's certainly a possibility, but I'm not sure. But for now, it is AJ Styles. I guess a little more of a blockbuster matchup when you think of AJ Styles, who's been one of the best in the world for probably 10 years now, at least, finally making his way a couple of years ago to the WWE, and now AJ Styles and Brock Lesnar. That's a marquee matchup there, and something that I think every fan is looking forward to.
I am as well. That's going to be a great matchup. But with Jinder Mahal, one thing as far as maybe him not keeping the title, I think was paramount and was present. I was present when I heard the news that they were canceling actually one of the shows beforehand, and they're going to only do one show in India due to ticket sales. So that tells me that even though Jinder Mahal in his own country gets a lot of viral hits, a lot of social media attention, and also a lot of press, it's not translating into actual dollars and cents. And obviously, from what you've commented on your show on many occasions, that's also not translating in overall ratings worldwide, especially here in America as well. So there's also, with the Survivor Series, a great matchup when you're always considered the elimination match, when a traditional Survivor Series 5-on-5 matchup. So I want to hear your thoughts on it, because it does include returning Triple H. He's been back in action the past couple weeks at some house shows, along with Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, Braun Strowman, and Finn Balor against Shinsuke Nakamura, John Cena, who is in and out of movies at this point in time, or you can call him Ferdinand. It's your choice. Shane McMahon, obviously, also as well, Bobby Roode, and also Randy Orton as well. So your thoughts on this traditional Survivor Series match, which, as you know, goes back from the beginnings of the Survivor Series itself.
Yeah, 1987, the first Survivor Series, and back then it was all these 5-on-5 matches, and this matchup kind of takes you back because there's lately at the Survivor Series, you don't have, especially in the 5-on-5 matches, they don't like to put all the stars in those matches. They like to give them, the title matches and all this other stuff going on, but there's a lot of star power in this Raw versus SmackDown match. Triple H was a late addition. Kurt Angle is in there, his second match back after they kind of rushed him, like with 2 days notice. They put him on the last pay-per-view event. Shane McMahon on the SmackDown side. John Cena was added to that match recently as well. Originally, I think he was going to referee the Brock Lesnar versus Jinder Mahal match, but I'm guessing one of Vince's crazy days where he just decided to blow everything up must have happened. He just decided to look at everything and said, no, this isn't working. And it just smacks of that, because so much has happened since this card was first announced. So much has changed. Of course, Triple H is replacing Jason Jordan, who is the storyline son of Kurt Angle. So that adds a big amount of star power to that match now, with Angle, Strowman, Finn Balor, Samoa Joe running out Team Raw. And yeah, this just takes me back. And the whole Raw versus SmackDown thing, to really go off for a second here. Sorry, Gerald.
Think I lost you again, Mike.
No, you have to have a Hell in a Cell match. You have to have a TLC match, and it's not a natural progression. And this right here with Raw versus SmackDown, it wasn't natural when the SmackDown guys came and beat down the Raw guys at the end of Raw a few weeks back. There was like a little interaction between Kurt Angle and Shane McMahon the prior night on the last pay-per-view, No Mercy, I believe. But there was no reason for Raw and SmackDown to have this blood feud other than there was a Survivor Series pay-per-view and they had to sell it. So, I mean, it was kind of cool how they set it up with this kind of these kind of beatdowns and the invasions, but it didn't really come off to me as something that naturally evolved. It came off as something that was like, why is this happening? It's okay, it's kind of cool, but why is this happening? That said, though, Gerald, it should be a very interesting match. A lot of great personalities in there. Like I said, a lot of stars. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
If you had $1 for every time the WWE did not actually execute properly an invasion angle, I think both you and I would be millionaires by now. But that's beside the point. I mean, this goes back several years, so I just can't agree with you more on that. And the fact that also as well that these matches, which we're going to talk a little bit more how in here in a second. You've got, but even in the main event with Brock Lesnar and AJ Styles, nobody's putting up a title, and it's all these non-title matches, which I've said before, pretty much mean zilcho to me, and really just you got to put up titles, you got to make it mean something, and across the board on at least with the tag team matches as well, it's not really just making it important at all. It's kind of disappointing, and it lessens that invasion type angle even further.
And the irony is, Gerald, you have all these champion versus champion matches happening at the Survivor Series, and next month's pay-per-view is called Clash of the Champions. So it really seems like that's what should be happening at Clash of the Champions, champion versus champion, but they're doing it here at Survivor Series, and they say it's the only time this year that Raw versus SmackDown, first time, the only time in this calendar year that you'll have stars from each brand battling each other. And we know it's not going to be the case, but they like to say that. And, I guess give them that. It's something, it's a ploy to get people to buy the pay-per-view, and more power to them, I guess.
Well, with all these recycled WCW names that they have from the past, like Clash of the Champions, Starrcade, and also War Games that they're throwing around as of late to some of their cards, it seems like what old is new again, but it's just, to me, it's more recycled names without any real imagination. But at this point in time, with WWE being the main player right now in the North American market, it's just very hard to argue with what they have going right now. But a lot of the things that they do has my head scratching, and I know it has yours as well. But let's just break down the rest of the card. There's, again, another non-title match between the women's champions, Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair. There's a traditional women's 5-on-5 Survivor Series elimination match. There's Intercontinental Champion Miz versus United States Champion Baron Corbin in a non-title match. There's actually is a title match with Cruiserweight Champion Enzo Amore versus Kalisto. And it looks like an okay card, but nothing really stands out to me as something I've got to watch. Is that the case, or do you really see some things that might be interesting for professional wrestling fans out there to really be looking forward to?
Well, something that you missed there, Gerald, was the six-man match, which is the Shield finally reuniting. They were supposed to, of course, reunite last month, but a viral infection that WWE termed kind of broke out in the WWE locker room. A lot of people saying it's viral meningitis, but guys like Bray Wyatt, Bo Dallas, the ring announcer JoJo, and Roman Reigns were all this viral infection. So the Shield reunion that was supposed to take place take place last month ended up being shelved. They ended up putting Kurt Angle. That was why I mentioned that Kurt Angle came back a couple days' notice. Kurt Angle replaced Roman Reigns in that match with the Shield. So this, for all effects and for all purposes, is the official reunion of the Shield. Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins versus the New Day. Big E, Kofi Kingston, Xavier Woods, and the New Day coming off a great series of matches with the Usos, who actually are also on the card as you another non-title match there, Gerald. Cesaro and Sheamus representing Raw, the tag team champions there, versus SmackDown tag team champions, the Usos. So Usos and New Day had a fantastic series of matches. And so New Day is riding high coming to this match with the Shield. And two teams that work well together, two six-man teams that work great together. I think this could be the stealer. They could be the show stealer of the night.
But is it an effective way to use the reuniting of the Shield? I think that when we first perceived that the Shield would be reunited, I expected them at higher altitude because all the success all three have attained.
Oh yeah, I expected this not to happen until probably WrestleMania or after that. I expected this to be a much more prominent thing. But we talked about Vince McMahon kind of blowing things up. Maybe he's finally 3 years into this thing saying Roman Reigns needs something to get the fans back on his side. And Roman Reigns was never more over than he was as part of the Shield, as the strong, silent guy in the Shield. And when they broke him away and when they had him doing these goofy promos talking about suffer and succotash and all this stuff, that is when people turn sour on Roman Reigns. And this is one of those things that they like to do every now and then. Nostalgia, bring it back. I mean, that's funny to say nostalgia. It's funny to say nostalgia. This is like, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're banking that they'll get Roman Reigns back in the good graces of the fans, and the Shield was booked. I mean, in a sea of bad over the recent years, the Shield was booked absolutely perfectly. They were kept very, very strong, and the crowd was really, really behind them. And they were broken up probably prematurely, but I think the Shield, yeah, it's too soon, but I think there might have been a little panic backstage. Obviously, I don't know for sure, but they are looking to get Roman Reigns to be the guy. John Cena is, as you mentioned earlier, has 1 foot out the door. They need a guy. There are other guys that I think would be a better fit because he has been rejected. Roman Reigns has by the fans for quite a while now, but this is what they want. This is the guy. This is the tall, good-looking guy with nice hair that they want. And I think they're banking on this Shield reunion to help them finally, after years, achieve it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm kind of against it myself because I think he would be much better placed as a heel villain type character. But he has been obviously, or the WWE hierarchy have been resistant in making him such by himself. I think it would satiate the fans' need to boo him at this point in time in his career, and I think it probably would help him long term. But then again, the same would go for Bayley. I think she should be put in a place where she could really get back into the limelight by being placed in a villainous role. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be in the cards as of yet, but things could change as they always do in professional wrestling. Once again, that's breaking down the Survivor Series card for 2017. No one better than Mike Crockett of the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. He, along with his good friend, not his arch nemesis, as the pictures always say on their sites and their social media. They're together. They're the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. You can catch them Tuesday nights on the Podcast Radio Network, the NAI Network, and BDA Radio, and I believe also Apple Podcasts as well, correct?
Oh, yeah. Anyway, you can get podcasts, you can find us.
Well, absolutely, because that's where we get a lot of stuff from you guys is on those networks. And like I said, anywhere you can really get podcasts are out there. you'll find the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing, because they have such an awesome name, and it's not about nothing. But there's some other things I want to talk to you about within the realm of professional wrestling. I heard a little thing recently, a little tit for tat on Twitter, escalate into actually a match between Kenny Omega, who some are actually considering right now to be one of the best, if not the best wrestler right now on the planet, against, well, long standing top wrestler, Hall of Famer in many people's minds, Chris Jericho. So I ask you, that type of match, should it happen, I believe January 4th in the Tokyo Dome for New Japan, that kind of something is something that a lot of fans weren't expecting because of Chris Jericho's ties with the WWE.
Yeah, you are correct. It is January 4th for New Japan Pro Wrestling, the Tokyo Dome, their biggest show of the year, New Japan's biggest show of the year, Wrestle Kingdom 12. And yeah, it was quite a surprise. They were going back and forth, and people were just like, ooh, Jericho's really going after Kenny Omega. And it started to evolve when you thought Chris Jericho is doing this wrestling cruise coming up, and you thought maybe that they would book Omega versus Jericho on this cruise, perhaps, because Chris Jericho is working with Ring of Honor to promote shows actually on the ship. Apparently, Jericho went to Triple H about getting NXT to be a part of it, and Triple H turned him down, so he went to ROH. Maybe that's a little bit of what's going on here, where Jericho's trying to, put it in their face. But the fact that it was announced on a show in Japan that it is Kenny Omega versus, he is the United States champion of New Japan, by the way, against Chris Jericho, who, as you said, has not wrestled anyplace else but WWE since 1999. And a really big surprise. And you have to think, I mean, I don't think we've talked about this, Gerald, but the fact that the Young Bucks, who are mainstays in New Japan Pro Wrestling and ROH, they were sent a cease and desist order from WWE because the Young Bucks like to do the old DX taunts. They like to do the crotch chop. They tell people, to do certain things, and they do certain hand gestures that are reminiscent of DX back in the day. And yeah, they were sent a cease and desist from WWE. So we know WWE is aware of the Young Bucks, aware of what's going on in New Japan Pro Wrestling, and it seems like they're not very happy about it. So Chris Jericho going to New Japan to be a part of their biggest show of the year, and no doubt it's going to get a lot of eyes on New Japan Pro Wrestling, and New Japan has kind of really risen in favor in the United States fans' eyes over the past few years. Of course, a couple of years back, they brought in Jim Ross to be on the announce team for Wrestle Kingdom, and just doing shows in Long Beach, California this past summer. New Japan has really raised their profile in the U.S., and this is a major coup for them. And I can't think that Vince McMahon's happy, though. He did tweet just a couple days later, "Happy birthday" to Chris Jericho on Twitter. So I'm not quite sure where he stands with WWE. Some people say he'll be forgiven. He'll be back in the fold. Actually, my partner, Kingpin Brian Malone, says that. I can't think that, especially, like I said, the way they sent the cease and desist out to the Young Bucks. I can't think that they're anything but a little perturbed, or much more than that, when it comes to Chris Jericho going to New Japan to headline the second biggest event, the second biggest promotion in the world, New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Well, maybe that's your sound reasoning as far as exactly what's going on in New Japan is probably part of the reason why they just informed shareholders that they are actually, their revenue is 20% above what they took in last fiscal year. So obviously they're a company back on the rise, and as they have been for the past few years now, they've really caught momentum once again to almost rival what they were doing in the 90s. So definitely that's great to see. And with Chris Jericho, it's obvious that he's not contractually bound with the WWE right now, per se, But if this is just a one-shot payday type deal for him, that might be okay with Vince and whatnot. Just, as long as he stays maybe active doing Fozzy, his books, whatever, his podcast, what have you, and not focusing on a extended career with Ring of Honor, New Japan, what have you. So we'll have to wait and see. Like you said, I know you're a little bit uneasy about it. I kind of as well. But if it's just for one big matchup and maybe his desire, obviously, to meet Kenny Omega because he is thought of so fondly within wrestling circles right now, maybe that's the WWE allowing Chris Jericho to go ahead and do it because maybe Chris Jericho, from what I've seen and what I'm able to ascertain, has in the past couple of years done a lot of favors for WWE as well. So that's something definitely to look at there. But there's some also other great news within the world of wrestling as well. Lucha Underground did get picked up by El Rey, the El Rey Network, for a 4th season, but it was kind of on the fence for a while there. And I'm not sure everybody is happy about it within the locker room that Lucha Underground got picked up for another year.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the contractual situation is with a lot of the talent. From what I was hearing, a lot of the guys either their contracts ended or they got out of their contracts. A lot of the contracts are very strict in terms of what you could do for independent wrestling, and a lot of guys wanted to get out of those contracts, and some of them did. And I'm not sure what the roster is going to look like when they come back for season 4. So I'm not sure what kind of show we're going to see for Lucha Underground season 4, but I'm interested to see what they do. I mean, they have good storytelling. It's a much different product. If anyone out there hasn't seen Lucha Underground, it is a much more cinematic product than you're used to when it comes to wrestling. It's wrestling in a completely different light. And if you're kind of sour on what's going on in wrestling today, and if you want to just throw out of your mind the fact that this is a sport, if you want to just take any notion of that out of your head, this is a very cinematic approach to professional wrestling, very different. And with the writing, they have actually a former WWE writer as their head writer, but like I said, a much different take on pro wrestling. If anyone can take a roster that may be depleted at this time and build it up, it is the guys at Lucha Underground. They create new characters for the most part for the guys that come in, the independent wrestlers that they use, the guys from Mexico that they use. So it is a completely different experience, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they're able to do with Lucha Underground season 4. I mean, interested to see who comes back, and interested to see who they bring in, and it should be a very interesting thing. I said interesting a lot, but yes, it will be interesting.
It definitely will be seeing that show because it is kind of off the beaten path from your traditional professional wrestling show. It ain't your daddy's professional wrestling show, that is for sure. Yes. So, but I'll ask one more thing before you go, because I know you got to tape your great show and your awesome show. Once again, this is Mike Crockett from the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. Gotta ask you on this. I know we touch on it almost every time we talk, but Impact Wrestling, it is just, the continuous, painful continuation. I had to use that twice. The continuous painful slog or journey that this company takes seems to find no new ways to find depths that you didn't think they could reach before, but they're now in Canada. They did some tapings in some Canada recently, but that may be the only place where they can go at this point in time.
It is really just I just want to see a timeline of TNA that became Impact Wrestling, that became Global Force Wrestling, and is now Impact Wrestling again. I just want to see a timeline of all this stuff. I think it's going to make a great book someday. But people have written off Impact Wrestling for the past 10 years, and it's
I know we have on many occasions.
Yes, it is still living and breathing. And as you said, they basically moved their operations to Canada because basically they are now owned by the Fight Network, which is a Canadian TV station. So they're up there now. A lot of releases over the past month or so. The entire referee corps has exited because that they were going to use local Canadian referees to do the matches. Like, of course, one of the head referee is Earl Hebner, the famous Earl Hebner, the one that quote unquote screwed Brett at the Montreal event Survivor Series, ironically enough. But yeah, a lot of guys, of course, Jeff Jarrett, who was back in charge for a little bit, and there was some issues where he put himself into rehab, or I think the rehab came after he was let go from Impact Wrestling.
There
but
was an independent date in Canada, I think, that he was intoxicated, inebriated, not in any condition to perform, I think is the verbiage that likes to be used in situations like this.
Yes, but again, a lot of releases, and it's kind of similar, I guess, to Lucha Underground in terms of it'd be interesting to see what becomes of the Impact roster in Canada. I assume they'd use more Canadian talent, more local talent, because Impact Wrestling doesn't. I mean, you don't think they have the money, but they do spend. They do spend on occasion and bring in big names, but yeah, it's going to be a different Impact Wrestling, and it's going to stick around, Gerald. And we'll be back on here talking around the Royal Rumble, and Impact Wrestling will still be living and breathing. I don't know in what form, but it will still be around. And hopefully, Brian and myself, we know people that are still working for Impact Wrestling, and hopefully this is an opportunity for more guys that we know, independent talents, to get contracts with a national company and make a little money. And that's a good thing for wrestling. That's a good thing for independent wrestling. That's a good thing for everybody. So I hope, for our sake, for everybody's sake, that Impact Wrestling sticks around, and it'd be interesting, there's that word again, to see what happens with Impact.
I will say this, that yes, for the guys out there and gals that compete every day in professional wrestling, having another alternative is great. I know you and I have been seeing the death knell for ages now when it comes to Impact Wrestling, but I'll tell you what, with Impact, it's just so hard to watch that product and stand behind it because of all that they've gone through. And you're right. It is Impact Wrestling. I think you just at this point might as well call it the cockroach of professional wrestling, because they're just going to be, continue living no matter what you throw at it. So at this point, of course, we can't pick on them too much, or they'll try to cut off our show too, both of our shows, like they did to Law. But we won't say that. Won't say that out loud. I'm sorry I said that. But anyways. I will say this, that the professional wrestling world has so much going on, and there is no better way to get your information than the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. Mike, before you head on out, tell us why, once again, why there is no better place to listen to all your professional wrestling news than the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing.
Thanks so much, Gerald, again, for having me on. Me and the Kingpin, Brian Malonis, I'm a former referee. He's a current independent wrestler. And we bring a personal insight into what's going on in the world of professional wrestling. We do talk about what's going on today. We do talk about what happened in the past. We talk about our own personal stories. One of our most popular podcasts is an episode where we talked about our chances that we had to make it in pro wrestling and what went wrong. That is one of our most popular episodes. So you can go back and find that. We do 2 podcasts a week on 2 different feeds. Monday, we're on the NAI Wrestling Network, the New Age Insiders Wrestling Network. Thursday, we're on our own feed. And again, just search WPAN for Wrestling Podcast About Nothing on any podcast app. You can find all of our feeds, subscribe to them all, listen on demand, or of course, listen to Brian and myself every Tuesday night on the Podcast Radio Network, and it's at WPAN on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff.
And I'll tell you what, seeing as how your show and my show are now some of the elder statesmen of the Podcast Radio Network. It's good to have someone that I can always count on to provide everybody out there from the pop culture cosmos listening audience the latest information, indeed, But I'll tell you what, Mike, you and Brian have a great show. I've listened to many episodes. They are truly hilarious, especially when you guys get, I'm not going to say, a little bit of the drink going on there, but let's just say you guys are having some fun, or when some, industry friends come by. Those shows are also some very interesting ones as well. But
Thank you very much.
I'll just leave it at that. But people have to listen and check out all their great shows each and every week, twice a week. It's the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. You got to check it out today. The Podcast Radio Network, Apple Podcasts, the NAI Network, and BDA Radio. This is a can't miss podcast, and it's all because of Mike Crockett and the Kingpin, who, don't call him a former wrestler or he might hit you with a former chair. Kingpin, Brian Malonis. Mike, as always, my friend, it's just truly great having you on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again about the wonderful realm of pro wrestling very soon.
Really appreciate it, Gerald. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike, and it's always great to have you as part of the pop culture cosmos.